All right, so I'm Sarah Skenga. I'm going to be kicking off the session here talking about how to adapt the 4D framework to teach ecology to non-majors. And my co-authors on this presentation are going to be presenting later in the session more detailed information. So this is really a general presentation that is a nutshell version of this paper that just came out in Frontiers. And the slogan, I guess, for this paper and presentation is 4DEE for all. So thinking about how to make the framework accessible to everyone, and in this case, non-majors. So why do we care about adapting the 4DE framework for non-majors? Two major reasons. First, is a huge audience, much bigger than STEM majors or ecology majors alone. And second, I think we can all agree that everyone needs ecological literacy given the pressing environmental problems that we have going on in the outside world. So I'm going to start with an introduction to the framework, make sure everyone's familiar with it, and then shift to how we should adapt it for non-majors. So it's the 4-dimensional ecology education framework. So it has 4 dimensions. First, core ecological concepts, and these are concepts that sort of all ecology majors should know. Ecology practices, which is like a skills dimension. Human environment interactions, which is where we pull humans into the framework. And then cross-cutting themes, which are things that you touch on throughout the semester. This framework was developed with majors in mind. And so what you have under each of these 4 dimensions is a list of elements, which are basically topics. So if you check out the boxes under the core ecological concepts, you'll see that they're the typical scaling from organisms to biosphere and all the concepts that go around with, along with that ecology majors should know. The key to the framework is integration. So in this example, I have pulled an element from each of 3 dimensions. And you can imagine some kind of learning activity that encompasses ecosystems fieldwork and systems thinking. And the idea is that making these multidimensional learning activities will deepen students' understanding of all the elements involved. And this multidimensionality should be applied to both lessons and courses. So if we think about a typical ecology course for majors and actually how the textbooks are designed as well, in a 15-week course, we'll be hitting core ecological concepts nonstop. I mean, that's basically the backbone of the course. There's a lot of green, a lot of yellow, a lot of blue in this course plan. The human environment interactions are at the end. And if you run out of time, they may kind of just fall off the cliff and you may not have time to cover them. This approach won't work for non-majors. So for non-majors, what they care about, what they think is most exciting is the human environment interactions. So I'm going to shift now to thinking about 4 different ways that we can adapt the framework to work well to engage non-majors. So that first one is really make HEI, human environment interactions, the backbone of the course. Use the core ecological concepts to support, like an accessory to the other 3 dimensions. Thinking about that human environment interactions dimension a little bit more, one of the elements is ethics. And we recommend that you kind of interweave ethics throughout the HEI dimension and indeed throughout the course, rather than covering it like a standalone topic. If we shift to the ecological processes dimension, so that's the skills dimension, thinking about non-majors in an ecology class, they're often going to need to be building their scientific literacy. It might be the only science class they take. And so we recommend focusing in on designing and critiquing investigations as an element that should be, again, interwoven throughout this dimension and indeed throughout the whole course. Shifting to cross-cutting themes. So there are 2 elements under that dimension that are really just great targets for non-majors. And the reason that they're great targets is that they are important for many different careers, including careers that are outside of the sciences. And so we recommend really leaning into systems thinking and spatial and temporal scaling, because ecology courses are a great place to teach these elements, and they'll also be really interesting to students because they are useful for their careers. Again, the core ecological concepts, think of them like a support system for the other dimensions. We often talk about them as a buffet. Pull from it as you wish, but focus the course on HEI. So this is kind of our adaptation of the framework for non-majors. And if you would like to learn more about this adaptation, please check out our paper. So I put a QR code on the next slide in case anyone wants to access it using that method. Thank you.
So hi, I'm George Middendorf, and what I want to do today is talk about hooks. Not these hooks, but hooks used in classroom teaching. And I want to talk a little bit about using hooks to engage with students in non-traditional settings for non-traditional audiences. And as Sarah has outlined briefly, with a particular focus on non-majors and reaching out to non-majors, students who happen to be in courses where you have ecological content and you want to reach and hook them. Now, there are three definitions for hooks. The first is, of course, the simple picture hook, a piece of metal or material that's curved or back for holding or hanging things, and that includes obliquely crochet hooks as well, as you can see. But the second definition is a piece of metal, typically barbed or baited for catching fish. And this is where things get interesting or start to get interesting, and that is that the design of hooks becomes very complex, increasingly complex with regard to fishing. For those of you who fly fish or any other kind of fishing, there's a huge variety of shapes, sizes, and structures of hooks, and you use them for specific audiences, specific fish. So a hook for trout and bass differ greatly. The third definition for hook is more pertinent to use in classroom, and it's designed specifically to capture attention. So let me just illustrate this with a musical hook example that illustrates a short lyrical line or a melodic passage that catches or engages the listener, and by grabbing the listener's attention, creates an involuntary image or earworm that results in song memory. This speaks for itself. It's not Tom Clack of real rock. It's a one you all know, at least those of us of a certain age. The efficacy of musical hooks is influenced by the hook's placement, the associated memories and when and where it was heard, the recency of exposure, the repetition, and in particular, the design, the rhyme and reason of the hook itself. So Allchin talks about engaging students, and by engaging students by reorienting the focus of attention, by reestablishing a social relationship, by orienting the students to the day's topic, by motivating personal commitments to the material, and by using a hook. And we believe that using 4DEE, and as Sarah has outlined in her talk, focusing on the human environment interactions and the elements therein. Those then allow you to reach out to the students and grab them. And like musical hooks with the placement, memories, exposure, repetition, and design, ecological hooks need to consider aspects of the students or the audience itself. That includes the location of the institution in which you teach, whether it's West, Midwest, Northeast, South. There are specific aspects associated with each of those regions, as well as with whether the region your institution is in a local setting, whether it's urban, suburban, or rural. In addition, you might want to consider the institutional type, whether it's a Carnegie consideration of a doctoral or a masteral or baccalaureate, or whether it's a focus on an HBCU, an MSI, or a tribal college. And you might want to then consider the course. And here we're talking about whether the course you're teaching is an intro course, or it's a gen ed or a survey, capstone, independent study, and what level, freshman, sophomore, junior, and what are the goals associated with the particular course you're teaching. Those all then lead to the student audience. And here we focus today mostly on non-majors, but the consideration is not just non-majors, but non-majors, particularly whether they're non-majors in general or whether there is a mixed class. And then you want to consider student interests like protests, climate change, homecoming events, on-campus job fairs, etc. What is it that the students are particularly focused on associated with the particular class that you're teaching? In addition, you want to consider the aspirations and goals of the students in the class, whether they're just, I'm here for a job, I'm here because my parents made me go to school, whether they want to go to grad school or professional school, or whether they're here, on an athletic scholarship. But keep in mind that attention's not engagement. Hooks aren't effective motivators necessarily. The hook should not be a bait and switch. It should not be a gimmick. Hooks need to be integrated with a lesson. They need to be in depth. And one last framing thought with with respect to creating hooks, you should focus and use and take advantage of teachable moments like COVID to talk about disease ecology, or campus student bodies to talk about population demographics. Thank you.
Thanks, George. I'm John Honey, and thank you for coming here. Thank you. I'd like to especially thank Justin and Erica for organizing this session, and to the rest of the team for helping me to think more clearly about how to teach ecology to non-majors. I teach ecology at Emerson College, and my students are art students. George just described various things to consider when developing hooks to engage students in ecology, and I'm going to talk about a particular population. The key is, as George says, is to know your students. My students present a unique population with an opportunity to learn ecology. And please humor me for a second of pointing out what we're doing here is communicating. And my students specifically trained to do this, to communicate ideas in different modalities. Arts are all about communication, transmuting ideas and emotions into sensory expression that can be experienced by others. Art students study fine arts, the stage, painting, film, video, animation. The knowledge and worldview of the artist and the team working together to create art is often reflected in the artistic piece. As teachers, we have a wonderful opportunity to inform that worldview, reaching out not only to artists and their collaborators, but also to their audiences. And arts are broader than one might think. At Emerson, students major not just in writing and performing, but also in editing, publishing, producing, marketing. And as you can see, these students are a large audience in themselves, but they also have the capacity to reach an even larger audience, and they're specifically trained how to engage and move that audience. And so we need to think about how to leverage their interests and concerns and capabilities. And so like young people anywhere, they are concerned already about, and some to the point of deep anxiety over the widely reported environmental degradation driven by modern society. And they're also interested in nature for its intrinsic beauty and the lessons it can teach us about ourselves. And as ecology instructors, we can leverage that by knowing about some of their characteristics, how their education focuses on both the practical application of their craft and the theoretical understanding of artistic principles, and their experience with complex project management, often with really rigorous production schedules. And as a result, these students are trained to excel in environments that value innovation, creativity, and interdisciplinary approaches. Moreover, the visual and performing arts students are adept at giving and receiving constructive feedback, a skill that can enhance classroom discussions and group projects. They can also bring a fresh and creative perspective to traditional academic problems, contributing to a richer and more diverse learning environment. Understanding the dedication and passion that these students bring to their artistic pursuits can help instructors appreciate the unique capacities and potential challenges, such as balancing demanding studio work with academic coursework, and sometimes a measure of self-doubt in relation to the sciences that I think we've all observed. So Sarah mentioned systems as a topic that should be emphasized as relevant to most student populations. That's also true with art students. With them, we might point out that performances are systems. We might ask them about the components of a performance. What are some of those components? How are they related? How is the whole greater than the sum of its parts? Most people don't realize all the necessary roles that are played in a performance, the same with relationships among those components. And that's why I don't have any vector lines here in connecting this text. So like performances, ecological systems like food webs are made up of interconnected parts that contribute to the whole, and it's greater than the sum of its parts. And although students may never have heard of a trophic cascade before, their experience may provide a basis for their insight into questions like, how does a system adapt when a component's altered? And we can start with the familiar, with showing them various performances they may be familiar with, talking about what's the role of understudies and senior assistants, what's the difference between viewing Macbeth in a theater versus on a video? And then we can talk about what's the consequences, potential consequences of eliminating predators or introduced species. So obviously, artists, like any group of people, are widely varied in their perspectives and priorities. And in the end, we have to get to know our particular students, whatever discipline they may be specializing in. By getting to know our students and fostering an inclusive and supportive atmosphere, we can choose hooks that leverage their interests and concerns and capabilities and engage them academically and personally with ecology. As Sarah said, we all recognize the need for more people to understand the nature of the ecological systems that we're embedded in and depend upon. And as ecology instructors, we can get to know our students and better be able to do that.
Is this on? Yes, no? Oh, thank you. The timing of this is important, so I'm going to wait. Okay, thank you all for being here. I am going to talk with you about maybe some might consider sort of the polar opposite of what John just talked about for his student population from the art students, which is my students, which are all business students. As Sarah mentioned, non-majors make up a very large population, and they have some specialized needs. Oftentimes, we're limited by time, by interest, and we need to think about focusing on them. Like I mentioned, and you saw this figure before, the non-majors that I teach are sort of in that large yellow circle. They are the business majors, and you may not teach exclusively business majors, but if you teach a non-majors course, you may teach a lot of business students. I teach at Babson College, which is a private small school in Wellesley, Massachusetts. All students are business majors. We have a large population of international students, and students do have to take half of their curriculum as business classes and half as liberal arts and sciences. Historically, business students have been disconnected from ecology and sort of science in general. If they do get taught it, it's sort of split out into sort of different areas. There has been a major call to unify those. This is from a very popular management education journal that just came out last month on calling for a socio-ecological way of teaching management. So at Babson, we have created a new learning competency, which is integrated sustainability. And so to do that, we've taken and created a systems thinking approach, which is one course integrating across all those areas. So this course that is required for every single student, it's a core course. It's taught by a natural scientist along with a social scientist. That can be a political scientist, economics, history, sociology. We have expanded the size of the class to be able to do that. And as you saw before, kind of the typical ecology majors course that would be designed for majors wouldn't work for our students. They wouldn't, if you're putting the CEC first, they're not going to understand why. And so this interdisciplinary socio-ecological systems course really puts HEI first. And you can see we sort of scatter in a lot of the CCT, a lot of focus on systems as well. So here's some of the major content that's in each of our courses. We've got the sustainability content that is taught across all of them. So this is ecological integrity and functioning, environmental injustice, natural capital, ecosystem services and externalities, as well as mitigation, adaptation, resiliency, and the circular economy. We also have major frameworks that we teach: planetary boundaries, UN Sustainable Development Goals, Ostrom's framework, and the Safe and Just Space framework, or donut economics, which really appeals to our students. And then we focus on skills. And so the skills are really around systems thinking, getting them to be able to think in that way, feedback loops, finding leverage points to actually make change, and being effective communicators across different disciplines. So some of the ways to engage and motivate business students are case-based approaches, collaborative strategies, hands-on, experiential learning, skills-based, practical, and at Babson, where we are focused on entrepreneurship, also innovative and positive. This is one example I have for you on teaching climate change through the lens of geoengineering, which my students are always really interested in. So we have students split up and focus on creating a systems map just on the ecology and then just on the social stuff, and then they have to find the connections in between. We sort of center the HEI and like Sarah mentioned, look at the ecological practices. This is another one where we take a news article and have students read through it and again sort of pull out those ecological concepts, those social and economic concepts, and then tie them together and ideally find a leverage point to make a change. And so this is effective because it really is case-based, collaborative, hands-on. They get to actually create something, and it's skills-based and practical. So joining the social sciences with ecology allows the HEI dimension to be prioritized. Students see the relevance of ecology to their lives and careers. And it really teaches my business students to learn that they need to exist within the limits of nature, which is like my fundamental goal for them. So as Sarah mentioned, I use CEC as a buffet. I focus on the scientific process for them to learn from the ecological practices, main focus on HEI, and then really focus in on systems and spatial and temporal thinking. All right, and I just want to say thank you to all of my amazing colleagues who have helped us create these courses. Thanks.
Moving quickly because I don't want my time to start before I get here. Awesome. Well, I'm Zakia Leggett. I'm an associate professor at North Carolina State University. And so I'll be talking about some work that my colleague and I have done to try to get students excited about environmental science and ecology. And so we use citizen science or participatory science. If you're not familiar, it is the practice of trying to get the public involved in scientific research. So trying to get the public involved in helping collect scientific data and increase their scientific knowledge. So why is that important? So it enables participants to have a connection to your research. It also gets them excited about environmental issues that they may not have known about or been connected to. And it creates a sense of community, which is what we want to do in our courses. So there were 3 courses that used this project, 2 courses at NC State, 1 course at North Carolina Central University, and we were looking at the microbe Delphtia. If you're not familiar, it is a microbe that poops gold. So it is very well known for precipitating gold nanoparticles. So the students got really excited about that piece. But we were trying to get students engaged in working across campus, working in groups. And these are the 2 profiles of the 2 institutions. So North Carolina Central University is located in Durham. It is an HBCU. North Carolina State University is in Raleigh, North Carolina. It's a large public land grant institution. And so the students were given the assignment to go and use a swab anywhere across campus. Keyword is anywhere. And we were challenging them to try to find Delphtia. And so there was a competition and the group that won t-shirt. So it was a pretty cool project. As you can see on both campuses, this is from North Carolina Central. The students leave class and they swab right outside of the course. So you can see some of the hot spots are in the dorms as well as where we taught the course. I think we did a little bit better job at NC State just because the students are in different dorms, but the goal was for them to spread across campus and see where the microbe might be found. So this was a campus-wide effort. Within my particular course at North Carolina Central, I had about half and half of STEM, non-STEM students. This is an elective course that students can take if they are not an environmental science major. So about 46% were non-STEM major. Had about an even split when looking at male-female students. We actually did not have any non-binary students or students that didn't identify as male or female because that was an option as a selection. My course is mainly an entry-level course, so mainly freshmen and sophomore students, which is really nice to be able to try to create a sense of community because freshmen always come in not knowing anybody. So they hate group projects, but in the end, they really like them. As far as diversity, ethnicity, this is a predominantly white institution, but you can see there the breakdown of some of the other backgrounds of the students. When looking at whether students had ever participated in a participatory science project, about 65% had never participated before. So it was really cool to expose them to that opportunity. And another question we had on the survey was, would they do it again? And many of them would. Students really enjoyed the project based on their open-ended question. You'll see there were one or two that did not, students will be honest. But for the most part, students enjoyed it and they liked that competition of looking for the microbe. So these are some of the comments I got from the open-ended question. People felt like it was cool to get outside. It was nice to feel like a scientist, and these are non-majors, feel like a scientist, right? Getting their hands dirty, and at the bottom, you can see someone was really excited to be done with the project. That was their most enjoyable part. How can you use this in your course when thinking about 4DEE? I feel like you could fill all of these buckets, but I just circled a few. But I feel like you could find a project that will fit for any of those topic areas. The benefits, again, I felt like it unified the course and gave some of my freshmen a sense of belonging. There weren't any barriers because they were able to do the work on campus, so they didn't need any supplies or transportation. If people are interested in something like this, there are many places to find participatory science projects. SciStarter is just one platform. I like it because I can create a list and then students can choose. And I would like to finish by thanking the students because they did not have to participate in my survey. They had to participate in the project, but I was able to get feedback from the students that participated. So that is all I have.
All right. Well, hi, my name is Erica Tejan, and I teach at Nevada State University. So I'm also going to be doing a little plug for campus resources. It's kind of awesome. Zakia talked about some citizen science work. I'm going to give you guys a little nugget of an assignment that I work on with a couple of courses that I teach. And it mainly are things that focus on that CEC component, the core ecological concepts, but as we've been talking about here this afternoon with the 4 dimensions of the framework, the 4DE framework, we'll get a chance to see how these things kind of integrate together. And Sarah did a fabulous job of showing some figures from our recent publication and pointing out the differences between the way that the core ecological concepts are often emphasized in majors courses versus the way that we've kind of come to see the growing importance of that human environment dimension. And kind of bear with me here this afternoon too. I'm also a work in progress as a classically trained ecologist, kind of focusing on those concepts really over a lot of things. But what's great about that HEI dimension too is that I kind of see it as focusing as a bridge, really, that connects you to a lot of things. You've heard the buffet approach mentioned today a little bit. So the focus here is just on an assignment that any learner, learners out there rather can use to practice making observations and applying ecology as ways to incorporate an ecological literacy into their lives. And I'm going to make a pitch for saying that anybody has a campus. I mean, we're all here in one fashion or another with available resources, accessible outdoor resources to be able to make some of these types of connections of many of those elements in real time and space. So college campuses are great places. We all have our own unique set of criteria and opportunities out there to be able to explore all of those dimensions. And I would argue that photos, we have tons of pictures in our lives, but making a picture, taking a photograph with intention of your location is kind of where we're all about. So this assignment that I would just want to throw at you this afternoon, I do it with my environmental science and general ecology course. They take a semester-long opportunity to take photographs of any 25 ecological concepts of their interest. The project itself is open-ended, so I don't give them a list. They generate the things they want to look at. It's interpretive. They go about making their own connections with photographs out there. This is one that I took from my backyard, and this is pretty CEC rich, as you can see from this example. Looking at things like photosynthesizers and adaptation. Once again, this is my interpretation. You're looking at some examples now of some student interpretation. Some of them kind of go heavy on the glossary style. Here's a picture, here's an annotated example of that concept. Whereas others, as you can see from some of these examples, kind of spend some more time thinking and talking about a narrative approach. The one caveat here is that they have to use their own photographs. So they can take pictures from their campus locations. We have opportunities to do that together in our lecture class, or they can go back and mine from old photographs that they have to look now at their world a little bit differently. And there can be extensions to this project. Like you could make this literally one day in your classroom or even larger than that, generating a concept bank, or creating other types of expressive works, turning your photographs that you have as sort of a compendium into natural history guides and campus projects, video journals. If you have somebody with some sight impairment, you can also talk about some oral impressions, because it's really all about making observations. So I hope as you've been listening to me kind of speed my through way here for a few minutes, thinking about what this might mean for you and your campus, and what kinds of opportunities you have. So all the pictures that you've been seeing, I took myself from my campus. And the other thing that I want to call to your attention is don't ever crop people and human components out of your photographs. That's kind of one thing that is a work in progress for me. And also taking a look at those pictures and keeping in mind those human dimensions. And you might, look at these types of photographs and see those things exactly come to mind. So some campus pictures. This is a near campus adjacent photo. And just to keep in mind that your campus has those unique resources to be able to do an assignment like this pretty handily. You don't need access to a special ice field site or an LTER. This obviously is not in my backyard, to be able to do an assignment like this. So I have some opportunities for some additional information if anybody's interested, sort of the speed run for this short little assignment. So thank you for your time and attention this afternoon. Appreciate it.
All right. Oh. What does this long title mean? It means we're going to be talking about using active learning in conjunction with the framework to benefit non-majors. This lecture has activities, so be ready to participate in a moment. All right, what dimension do you most closely associate with lectures? Concepts, practices, interactions, or cross-cutting themes? Hold up your fingers. All right, I see tons of ones out there, and that's largely what I would agree with. When we think about lecture, we often think about core ecological concepts. In fact, that's how our textbooks are oriented, right? They're just a list from organisms to the biosphere. I would also argue that sometimes lectures, we really hit cross-cutting themes pretty well. And the reason for that is oftentimes that's explicit, where we say we're going to have a lecture on evolution, and sometimes it happens on its own. For example, how can you talk about ecosystems without talking about systems? And so this is our domain for lecture. And if we're going to talk about lectures, what do you think about traditional lectures? Shout out your answer. You've got 15 seconds. Boring, right? We think about lectures, traditional lectures, they're not fun, we don't like them. And what's really interesting about that is we've been giving traditional lectures the same way for hundreds of years. The sage on the stage, chalk and talk, somebody up there talking at students. But we know now that active learning can really be used to encourage student engagement. And that's going to be really important for our non-majors. And so I view pedagogy as what underlines the framework. The framework is what we have, but how do we implement it is through our pedagogical choices. And so I'm going to give you some examples of how I've been doing that in my class. More specifically, what I've been trying to do is take the pedagogy of active learning to bring those ecological practices and human environment interactions into the lectures. Oftentimes people think, oh, that lives in my lab, or that lives in a special discussion section. We can do it all in the lectures through active learning. In my case, I have lectures of about 300 students, and we talked about the different types of non-majors we have. I have about 80% non-majors from all of those different groups spread out, maybe about 50 different majors in my class each semester. The way we're going to do this is using a student response system with 5 to 14 active events per lecture, ranging from 1 to 10 minutes. And almost every activity involves students talking to each other prior to answering. And our philosophy behind these is that we ask formative questions. It's almost never summative. We're trying to make questions charismatic and student-oriented, and when students are only awarded participation points. It allows them for creativity, a positive learning environment, and oftentimes our questions don't have correct answers. So what does some of this look like? Here are some different examples of just an example question. Some are multiple choice, make a graph, discuss a scenario, a true-false question, and so on. So we have a wide variety of ways that we engage. One thing over time that we've implemented more and more is worksheets. Specifically, worksheets tend to focus our groups of students around something together. And so we've shifted some things that we had before as regular questions into that worksheet mode because they were more successful. And lastly, we have some larger activities. I told you things can take 1 to 10 minutes. Sometimes we have larger activities that take 5 or 7 minutes where students really engage in a scenario or a simulation that lasts a little bit longer. So what does this all look like at the end? Here is a slide deck where green slides represent students being active, white slides represent us lecturing, and we spread out these activities throughout the lecture. This is a lecture at about 60%. So you might be asking, how long does this take? If I add a 3-minute activity to a lecture, how much material do I need to remove? Show of fingers. Less than 3 minutes, or more than 3 minutes? All right. People are saying mostly more than 3 or 3 minutes. The correct answer is less than 3 minutes. Why? Because we're not adding, we're replacing. We're taking that passive learning and replacing it with active learning. We're getting at a similar learning objective in a different way, often by integrating more dimensions. Admittedly, we still need to cut a little in the end. So this is what a series of lectures might look like for the semester. We've got our lectures on the bottom, coverage of the 4 dimensions on the left, and we can see it looks like a rainbow throughout the semester. We're covering all the dimensions as throughout the entire semester. You might always say, does it work? And well, generally, yes. We didn't do all this at once. We slowly implemented active learning over time. And as we did that, we saw better and better student outcomes. So we feel this method of integrating active learning in lecture has been successful. So what I hope I've been able to convince you of is that through active learning, we can take all 4 dimensions and put them into a lecture. And that active learning is going to be critical, particularly for our non-majors who might not be prone to engage, because it helps them to engage. And in doing that, we can help those non-majors achieve their learning outcomes. Thank you.
I'm Lauren Byrne from Roger Williams University in Rhode Island, and as the final speaker of the session, I have the great honor of summarizing, generalizing perhaps, and maybe even adding some new insights to wrap up. And I'm going to do that through some principles and pathways. How do we actually bring some of what we've already heard today together to improve 4DE ecology for all students? So the what, of course, is the 4DE. As Justin just alluded to, there's some hidden dimensions, though, and I'm identifying the 5th and 6th as the who and the how, the learners and the pedagogy, because we have to consider those, of course. And principle 1 is that ecological literacy is essential for everyone, regardless of majors, background, personal interests. And I like the idea of Earth citizenship, that we are all citizenships of the entire planet, and that's why we need to have the ecological literacy. Principle 2, student learning is the goal. Coverage of content is not what we're going to do. Knowing your audience, as John alluded to, all these DEI considerations to lead to accessible and inclusive classrooms for everyone. The implication of those first 2 principles are thinking about interdisciplinary and applied connections. Really, that's the HEI dimension, and I use this image in one of my classes to help students see all those relationships to ecology. Principle 3, as I've already alluded to, the goals and the pedagogy matter. Tough choices have to be made. We can't cover it all in any class for majors and especially for non-majors. So when we're making those tough choices, we can think about 4DE framework, and I like the phrase learner-centered and coupled with pedagogy here. All of our active learning methods, and in particular, I'm highlighting metacognition at the bottom. Getting students to think about what is really important, and we do that first by thinking about the learning outcomes. And the big picture, what do we want students to know, think, feel, or be able to do in about 5 years, right? Thinking long-term, bigger, significant. And I like the backward design pathway. This is the general one. We're using 4D as a starting point to design the learning outcomes or write them, and then the learning activities. So we'll see the LOs and the LAs and some other ones. To pick up what George was emphasizing, the hooks are the what and the how for the who. First, ideas, the content, and then the delivery is part of the pedagogy. Emotional, relevant, inspiring, memorable, to catch people's attention and keep it. Affective traits, things that are gross, maybe fun or cool or surprising. Local places, everyday lives, and of course the non-ecology careers. So I have some examples coming up for each of 3 pathways. First, thinking about 4DE influencing the learning outcomes. The learning outcomes can influence which learners are in your course at a big scale. The hook, the interaction between those two, and then thinking about how the learners in the hook influence the learning activities. One example I use is coffee. And there's some nice research that's been done about trophic cascades in coffee systems. And that makes an everyday connection to at least those who drink coffee. I don't, surprisingly. Pathway 2, thinking about how the learners are going to influence what you want to teach through 4DE, and the population of learners influencing your hook choices, then leading to more formalized learning outcomes and learning activities. An example here is my students in Rhode Island, lots of non-majors in my class. They see a lot of Canada geese, as I saw this morning on the beach. They really are everywhere. But what affects why they're everywhere and why they're certainly not in some places? And I have my students actually do some in-class work on that. Pathway 3, thinking of a hook first. It just falls into your lap. How does that influence how you're going to talk to the learners, what you're going to emphasize from the 4DE, and then the learning outcomes. CBS Sunday morning, pea cycling. Oh my gosh, that is a brilliant way to capture people's attention for talking about the nitrogen cycle. So this has lots of different dimensions. It's gross, it's really intriguing. In conclusion, learner plus hook plus outcome-centered teaching or pedagogy is key for non-majors, maybe even more so than majors. There is more than one pathway to do this well for lesson planning. The key is to think about your current situation. The who, what, where, when, why, how, I didn't get to it all. If we're thinking about the 5th and 6th dimensions, what is missing, what is limiting or challenging, what went by too fast, what else leads us into our discussion. So part of what our working group has been emphasizing is that we want to inspire everyone to teach non-majors rather than just stick to our particular ecology students. Ecological literacy for everyone provides endless opportunities for creativity and maybe even some fun, really interesting moments like talking about geese and pea cycling and coffee. All right, thank you.
All right, so that brings us to the discussion portion of our Inspire session. We saw some great talks today, and now we have a chance to ask questions, discuss them, and so on. We've got a couple of mics here. I don't know if we're going to have the mics wander or if people can come up to them. I'm not sure. People come up to them? Okay, great. So people, if you have a question, you can come up to the mic, and we'll just engage in a discussion. You're also welcome to engage in small discussions around your tables and so on. So are there any questions right out of the bat? And the mics are there.
All right, well, let me start it off. Again, I'm Ken Klimo from Wilkes University, although I'm retired, living in San Diego. One of the things that I find when I teach non-majors, especially about energy issues, is that I try to get them to think quantitatively about things. And in fact, that's one of the skills is quantitative and computer literacy. And a lot of the non-majors seem to be hesitant or resistant to that. And they'll tell me that they chose to major in art or they chose to major in something else because they weren't good at math. And so they have this mental block about it. And so I'm just wondering if you or anybody else then has this issue and how you go about addressing it.
And so I'll say any of us can jump up and talk at the mics, even if you did not present. So if anybody has any thoughts on that, feel free to jump up. All right, well then I'm here, so I'll give you a couple thoughts I have. Yeah, I think that's really interesting about non-majors because a lot of times that non-majors course may be one of 2 science classes they take during their entire career. So it's a really important aspect of what we do when we teach non-majors to get that quantitative literacy in there. And that's certainly in in the ecological practices dimension. That's in there. And I think what everybody's been talking about here today is a great way to think about that with hooks, right? Maybe they say, I don't like math, but if we can get them motivated and inspired, maybe they forget they're doing math and they're actually still learning it along the way because it was something charismatic.
I have a couple examples that I use just to introduce the general idea that we want numbers on things. And these are both from my Introduction to Sustainability Studies class, so sort of a different context, but the first one's ecological. Just doing some basic input, output, addition and subtraction of like fish or whatever hook might be relevant for your population, and getting them to think about sustainability as numbers changing over time based on reproduction and removal. The second one is less ecological per se, but I think it's a really fun example of a hook, is doing some math to figure out whether it's economically worthwhile to replace your toilet, right? Because it's actually based on my own life. I was thinking about whether I should replace my toilet to a low flow one. Actually, the math for the money doesn't suggest that it's worthwhile, that you can get a higher bang for your buck for sustainability by doing something else. So I think little examples like that are helpful. One thing that I've been talking about with another group, though, is making sure that our ecology lessons are accessible. And if quantitative reasoning is a big burden, do we want to put that in front of students? Because then they might feel the ecology content is inaccessible. So I think there's a tricky balance there, especially for introductory first-year students who, at least in my institution, are coming in and not even being able to place in a college algebra. It's a big problem.
There's a question in the Zoom. I don't know if people in the room are able to see it.
Well, I'm Charlie Nylon.
Charlie, 1 second. Sarah was
Oh, I'm sorry.
before you came up. Oh, she's now muted. Sarah, can you hear us?
Sarah, you're muted.
I was just trying to tell you all that there's a question in the chat in the Zoom, and I don't know if you're able to see it in person.
We cannot see it at the moment, but looks like somebody's
Should I
pushing
go ahead
it.
and read that out? Would that be helpful?
Oh, we have posted it here.
Great.
Why don't we go ahead and follow up on your question because it was related to the last one while we digest this one.
Okay, I'm Charlie Nylon for one more week, professor at University of Missouri. But anyway, I guess to comment on Ken's question, I found two things. One is I think that when I taught the non-major class, I had a lot of business majors. And one thing I found was that business majors thought all the math they knew from accounting classes and all that didn't apply anywhere else. And then finally, one student said, oh, like the population growth curve is the same as, I forgot what curve it is in business. It's something they use in business classes. And supply and demand and jobs and how many people you're hiring and all that. But I think one of the things I found was that some students have quantitative skills that they don't necessarily know they have. And the other thing I found was that doing a lot of in-class exercise where they work with each other really helped. Like we did a life table exercise where we went through that, and I showed them, we showed part of Village of the Damned to talk about cohorts because all the kids are born, at the same time and all that. But anyway, those kind of things seem to get them thinking about it at least. And then some of them had skills because I told them most of math is addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, and that's what you actually use most of the time in ecology. And that seemed to help a little bit. But that was just a comment, the main one being that a lot of times I think they do have skills they don't know they have.
All right, so I'll take this one because it looks like it's about what I presented. We do have a pre-post concept check. The first question is, do you have that? And yes, it kind of is the same each year. We ask the same questions before and at the end of the semester to see how students perform. Grading for the in-lecture activities is entirely participation-based. And so the secret I don't tell them is even if they answer one question, they get full credit, even if they worry about getting them all correct, because I know they were there doing what they should be doing. And so we want it to be very low stakes, but never tell them I told you that. And then lastly, with 200 students, the grading is pretty easy because it's participation based. We do have some assignments before and after lecture that are in our learning management system that when a student answers, they get instant feedback so we can still engage them in a type of active learning outside the classroom. But this is all very low stakes, open book, unlimited time. We want students to be learning, we're not assessing them. And so along the lines of questions about specific presentations, feel free to ask a question about any specific presentation that you like. It's not just the whole panel.
So Chris Beck from Emory. So the question I have, many of you talked about essentially full semester courses that were ecology or environmental science or sustainability. What about if you have 3 weeks for ecology, right? So you're teaching non-majors, but it's in the biology department, and so you can't just do ecology, right? You can probably do some genetics or evolution or other things. What would your recommendations be? Right. I know HEI first, right? But what amongst HEI and then the other dimensions?
Sarah, we volunteered you to answer that.
I could sort of answer that, maybe. Are people hearing me?
Yes.
Thanks, Mary Beth. I see your hair. So I think that the way to handle that is to take something like disease ecology, for example, or antibiotic resistance. That would be a good way to teach, evolution and maybe dabble a little bit in genetics. But I guess my question for myself is always, how much biology do they actually need to understand the stuff they're actually going to remember? And so it can be fun to fool myself that they will remember all the biology I teach them that I think is cool. But I guess I've just come to understand that that is not the case. They'll remember the stuff they think is interesting. And so finding HEI related content that they actually will remember is the gateway into them learning the bio content that they'll remember. So anything, I guess the hook is really what I'm saying, is thinking about a hook that will help them arrive at the content that I think is absolutely the most essential. I guess I've reduced the amount of biology content that I think is absolutely essential for them over time, because I'm just maybe being more realistic, at least for the students that I teach, about what they'll remember.
And I'm going to put Vicki on the spot since she recommended you, Sarah, to talk about what elements do you think are most important? You kind of covered them in your presentation to teach to non-majors from the core ecological concepts. Because I know in our paper we came up with a pretty solid thinking about that.
So which core ecological concepts do I teach to business students, or which parts of the dimension, which of all the dimensions?
So we kind of came up with a consensus on saying these may be the most appropriate core ecological concepts to teach to non-majors.
Yeah, so I think what we all decided in talking through this was really communities and ecosystems, and a lot of that has to do with systems connections, because you can then hit both, right? You can hit the CCT systems part, and many of the really fun, interesting examples that we've given and talked about are community-based or ecosystem-based. And so I think that's often where I focus. I also, for my business students, focus on the biosphere, so a lot of global stuff. I mentioned the frameworks and things like that. Like, I want to make sure my business students know the impact they're having on the world, both locally but also sort of globally. And so I talk sort of about global biosphere sort of stuff quite a lot. I don't talk very much about organism stuff because it's not really what they need to remember, right? The exact way that certain plants do things isn't quite as helpful for them to remember.
And if I could throw in something too, just kind of tagging off what Vicky's saying about the systems level approach, and that's also the beauty of ecology with the hierarchy, because we have nests, right? We have like hierarchical nesting. And so if you include community ecosystems, you're including communities. If you're including communities, you do have some organismal things that are a component of that. And that's the additional beauty of something like HEI. So Sarah's comment about, if it's something phenomenological or something that relates to a human concern in the first place, the number of things that you can wind up kind of trapping, I guess, conceptually in that idea, if to kind of bounce off Sarah's comment about antibiotic resistance. I teach a lot of pre-nursing students in my institution. And so kind of drilling down to exactly what that is, the science that they do need to know. So if you can kind of hone in on those big picture ideas and then see what things you trap, right, as a consequence of those biggest ideas. If you're reaching with Chris's question about where do you go, if you have a limited amount of time, what do you focus on? So big picture, and hopefully, gathering like a net out there, little fishes, get in there. So yeah, thanks.
For learner-centered practice, Mary Ellen Weimer's book really got me thinking about this. What are students interested in? Ask them, right? If you can leave some gaps in your syllabus, it could be later in the semester so you have time to plan, but ask them for what they want to talk about. And I do that in some of my upper level classes, especially where I have more flexibility for some of the issues that we can discuss.
I think place-based is also really important. I don't only teach non-majors, but I teach at Smith College, and we're lucky to have a river going through campus, and Paradise Pond, which is like iconic for Smith. So I feel like doing stuff in the river is something unfamiliar to a lot of them. We're working with macroinvertebrates, so they get something new, but then they also have this connection because it's connected to the place that they're at. And I think that place-based is a really good hook of saying, like, this is part of your environment that you are living in right now, at least. And they can really connect to, especially any kind of human interaction with that particular place that you are currently in, I think is a really good hook.
So before I get to my second question, just to get back to what you said, Lord, actually in my non-majors class, they decide every topic we're going to do. So they actually vote at the beginning of the semester. I let them choose, and then we go from there, right? We pick 4 out of the long list, right? But they get to vote. And they almost always pick ecology, right? And even if they don't, we work it in somehow, right? Oh, that high level, yeah, it's like you chose to take non-majors biology for your science requirement. What about biology interests you? Give me 3 things, all 100 of them, give me 3 things. And then we get this huge long list, and then they vote, right? The more direct 4DE question I have is, like, every one of you at the beginning of your presentation, or almost all of you, showed the logo, right? Showed that diagram. Do you show that to your students in your class and sort of talk about how ecologists have come to sort of think about ecology and teaching ecology, and sort of make explicit to them, right? You did to us how, the different parts of your class like fit into the framework. Do you talk to them about that? I saw some of you shake your head.
How about just a survey across the room?
Yeah, who doesn't raise your hand if you do that?
Yes, in any capacity.
So I haven't always.
Yeah.
For those on Zoom, though, about 5 people, I think, raised their hand for yes. So this is a rich discussion, perhaps.
Yeah, so my name is Kim Biorgo, and I'm at West Virginia Wesleyan College. and I'll be talking about 4DE stuff tomorrow. But yeah, I not only put it on the front of my classroom, like I just had the print folks printed as big as they could. I talk about it and how the class is broken down into these concepts, but I really liked your graph where you had the topics of your class, and I'm pointing to Justin for those of you who can't see me, with the breakdown of each of the dimensions and where you covered it. I thought that was really great. But I also put it in the syllabus as well, and I'll say, oh, go back to page, whatever page it ends up being on, and then that's where it is. So.
I was just going to piggyback and say that I do not use it, but I love the idea of doing that because I think it kind of shows them the big picture of what we're doing. But I'm so limited on time, so I don't know. Like my class is jam-packed, and Susanna has TA'd, so it's like every session we have a topic, so I have to figure out how to do that. So thank you for that challenge.
And I'll say this, it makes me think about the slide that Lauren had about metacognition, right? If students knew that they were engaging with a given element at a given time, would they get more out of a given activity? And I think that's probably the case, and it's probably a really low cost implementation. The way that I could see that working is on a slide. You simply say what dimensions that activity or that portion of the lecture or your larger activity are going to cover, and it's cost you just a few seconds to like pop that in there. Because you probably already know, right? You probably already know I'm hitting, scientific practices as well as this concept. But if students knew that, they might be able to better focus what they were thinking and doing. So I know Chris was being provocative because he knows that we don't do it, and we probably should for exactly the reasons that I was describing there. I'm going to call on George to see if he has any thoughts, because George always has something to say.
Well, thank you, Justin.
Yeah, well, it's a compliment. It's a good thing.
Yeah, no, I actually was thinking about this, and I'd have to say that one of the reasons I got involved in 4DEE was because my students always asked, why am I taking ecology? I mean, they just thought, oh, this is ecological science. And for those of you who don't know me, I taught for 40 years at Howard University, which is an HBCU. And many of my students, at least early on in my career, thought that, ecology had no relevance to their lives. And so they would always ask, how does this relate to my life? How does it relate to my community? And so we developed these exercises that brought in the HEI component so that they would understand these aspects and how ecology related. And we had, as was mentioned with Smith College, we started doing campus-based ecology and started looking at things on campus or near campus to relate ecology. And I want to throw out one really interesting exercise, which I always liked, which was a competition exercise. And it was focused on the restaurants that were available to students near campus and the question of time and energy and cost to go to each of the restaurants. And the goal was, if you had the opportunity to set up a new restaurant near campus, what kind of food would you serve and what would your price range be, and how would you compete? And so we got in discussions of niche and cost and energy, and would you walk from the business school all the way down, which is on the far end of campus, or would you walk from chemistry? And so, which group would you target on campus with the food and restaurant that you opened? But the students had to do that in an ecological framework. And so it became a very interesting exercise. So I do think that you can bring this in. At that time, I did not make explicit the logo because it didn't exist. But I think that throwing the logo up at the beginning of a lecture or at the beginning of the semester is really a terrific idea. And were I still teaching, I would do it.
Hi. So I'm not a professor. I'm a student still, but I wanted to come to this session because I want to work with students, and I have a background in bird stuff and environmental ed, and listening to y'all share all the different strategies that y'all have used is just like, what? So much thought goes into this. And Dr. Leggett's, I TA'd her class, and it all makes sense now. Like all the questions that would pop up, like there is a framework behind this. And the question that I'm getting at is, I love all this sharing. Is there anywhere that all of your brilliance is like stored or like uploaded or written about? Because the students, I don't know how many students are in here, but some of us like really want to connect with other students, young adults. I love working with young adults, and y'all have decades, and I'm not trying to call out anybody's age. Maybe I shouldn't have said that. But you have, anyway, I'm just curious, does this exist? Is it ever going to exist somewhere that's tangible to help the future faculty that want to bring their heart into these spaces?
And we're fortunate to have, I was going to have Chris maybe tackle that as head of the 40E committee about where we're restoring information and how people can access it. Or Lauren, you're going to?
Well, I was going to, I'm not sure exactly what you're referring to in terms of the resources or topics, because so many different things were presented. But I failed to say, so thank you for your question and your positive feedback, because I often wonder whether we're making a difference or not. But in my presentation, I showed it, but I failed to point out, because of the timing, my book is one resource. And are there any Springer representatives in the room? I always feel like I have to ask. I will send you and everybody in here the ebook version, because I get no royalties from it, to share that. And there's 50 of these learner-centered teaching activities. It was written well before we started talking about hooks, but I think there are some that have hook-like entities in them, like Lyme disease and plant competition with locally native species and that sort of thing. So that's one resource. And Chris might be able to speak to this 40E specific thing.
So again, I think it depends a little bit on, what you're thinking about in terms of resources, right? So like the like lesson plans or the teaching modules or, yeah. So there are a variety of places to go for those, and more the 4DEE connections to those are being more explicit, right? There's the EcoEd digital library, and Ken and Teresa and I at lunch today it will soon be migrating to what's called the Cubes Hub, and a lot of things reside on Cubes Hub, but EcoEd Digital Library will migrate there, and all the new resources added to EcoEd Digital Library will be tagged with 4DEE metadata, so you can figure out, what dimensions are there, right, and integration across dimensions. There is TIEE, or excuse me, which is our Ecology Ed Journal of Practice. And more recent things are tagged with 4DEE dimensions. I'll give a little shout out to a project George and I have been involved with, which is specific to tropical biology. It's called Ocelots, and these are online teaching modules related to tropical biology. And those are also tagged with 4DEE. So there are a variety of resources there. Okay.
Chris, before you go, Chris, mention the FNs, please.
Oh, yes, I'll mention the FMNs too. Teresa wasn't here to like throw something at it. Right, so the FMNs, these are faculty mentoring networks around 4DEE. The one for this fall is the Food, Water, Energy Nexus. And so if you're interested in anything related to food, water, or energy, you can apply. They meet on a particular regular basis, and there's funding for this. If you develop a teaching resource related to that, they give you money, which is fantastic. Unlike these days where you actually have to pay to publish something, they actually pay you to publish something, right? What a novel idea, right? Anyway, check that out as well. So, all right, Ken.
So let me put in a couple of shameless plugs here. So the first, what's that? Yeah, okay, I'll give three shameless plugs then. So first shameless plug while I'm thinking about it is that what Mary Beth is talking about is the idea that we're putting together a video, a resource on videos in ecology that is really linked directly to 4DEE. And so if you're interested, we have a workshop that we're going to be doing at 11:30 on Wednesday, if I'm not mistaken. And so I heartily recommend that you attend that workshop and learn about our resource and hopefully contribute to it. So that's shameless plug number one. Shameless plug number two is that I happen to be the editor for the bulletin, the ESA bulletin on education. And so I'm looking for education articles because the ESA bulletin has a history of publishing really, really good stuff on education. In fact, let me just, we're going to do active learning here. How many of you are familiar with ESA's Ecology 101 series? Anybody know Ecology 101? So for those of you who are familiar with it, you probably know that from 1991 until the year 2020, the ESA put out a regular series. It was all contributed by authors around the society, and it was on really how you go about teaching, and it was on education, and it was something that I think a lot of people read, and they really profited from it. I would say that the articles that might have been written in the 1990s and the early 2000s are still relevant today, and they're still worth reading. And so the question is, how do you get access to it? Well, you can go to the ESA webpage and get those articles. But one of the things that I've been working on, again, I'm retired now, and so I have a lot of time on my hands. And so for the last 7 months or so, I've actually put together a bibliography on ecology education articles, or articles that have been published on education in the ESA journals. On Thursday morning at 8 o'clock, if any of you are awake at that time, I'm going to be giving a presentation on that. The question is are ESA articles, or are ESA journals good to publish education articles on? Or are ESA journals good to publish ESA or education articles in? I don't know if I'm saying this correctly. But I'll say it correctly on Thursday morning, and go to the talk and find out. That was my fourth block.
And I want to jump in here. That was a whole bunch of answers. But one place I think I'd like to direct you is the 4DEE webpage on ESA's website, because the committee is working on developing the resources there to point you toward all the things that we're talking about. So if you want something with 4DEE, we will probably have links and say this is what you look for there and so on. That's still in the works. It's not done yet. But the hope is to have a one-stop shop where you can go to be directed toward these resources, even if they're not housed there. Yeah, no problem. No problem. So I have a question for some people in the audience. We talked a lot today about hooks. And I'm wondering if anybody has a favorite hook that they think is just great for their class or their students, that is just a wonderful way to help non-majors succeed in their course. Nobody has a favorite hook? All right, well, I'll talk about one that I was using the other day. The idea of talking about succession, and then the end question of that lecture is Smokey the Bear a hero or a villain? And the idea is that students have to think about those ecological processes and the public policy that has led to a buildup of materials in forested ecosystems that lead to larger, bigger fires. So it's kind of a charismatic way to get students to integrate that HEI dimension. I could ask them directly, what's happened with the buildup of wood, or I could ask it in this way that gets at a figure that most of them will know or have seen earlier in their lives, as an example of kind of something to draw students in to those other dimensions. How much time do we have left? Oh, we got Chris coming up with something.
Well, I don't have a favorite book, but I have a question, right, about hooks, right, and sort of, getting to Lauren's, knowing your students, and and maybe Vicky's lucky because all of her students are business students, right? But like in my class, like 45% are business, but then there's French and art history and math and computer science and, psychology, like it runs the gamut. And so the hook for the business school students is one thing, but the French major could care less, right? And the art history major could care less. And so the hook for them, all the business majors could care less, right? So then the hooks become more complicated, right? Or it becomes harder to find the hook, right? Okay, so Sarah knows the answer to how to find the multifaceted hook that like the B school student and, the art history major are both interested in. All right. Go, Sarah.
Well, I would like to speak for the whole team basically here that has been presenting today. We've been working on this exact question, and we have a manuscript in preparation trying to address it. We are calling hooks kind of universal when they appeal to many, many different audiences. Our discussions have led us to think that those hooks can be really good for business students, but that even better, if you're a business student, is going to be a hook that's related to probably your career and your major. So we're exploring these questions in this manuscript that we've been working on this summer. So you're almost like an audience plant to let us promote this upcoming manuscript. It's been really interesting to wrestle with these questions and to try to figure out what we think about it based on our experiences as instructors. So I think you're bringing up a great question, and it's been fun to explore it, and I hope people will check out our paper when we finally get it out there.
Sarah, if I might just follow up, just briefly, point out, Chris, the hook doesn't have to refer to the major of the student. The hook can refer to the location, the region of the campus, can refer to the student body itself rather than the major of the student. So that the hook has, there are enormous ways to approach this thing that are not major focused.
And I'll add that it's also interesting to think about the scale of hooks. A hook may be something that you're really interested in that you talk about all semester throughout your course. A hook could even just be something for one lesson, or you can do what I do a lot of, which is a lot of little micro hooks, where we're going to have a lot of different things where that audience might like that one a little bit more, that one might like that one a little bit more, but they're still general enough that everybody can engage with them in some way, even if they're preferred by some students over others.
Sarah, I don't know if you saw Chris, but he was very frustrated that you didn't give him the main answer. So if I can follow up. For the mixed majors, we've identified essentially what I presented on that one slide, the everyday connections like food or the coffee. P-cycling is, I think, that as well. The local examples, as Justin was just alluding to, but they don't have to, or George was saying, but they don't have to be specific to the campus, right? It could be the town management of an invasive species or something like that, that's in the news. And then the wow hooks, I think that's the shorthand for those ones that engage people's emotions. Either, wow, that's really awesome, I've never heard of that, or wow, that's really disgusting, tell me more. And those should appeal to a broad range of people regardless of majors.
I've noticed that mental health challenges are huge with this generation. I think, well, maybe all of us, but especially this generation seems to be really struggling with mental health. So that's a hook that I really bring in, that like spending time in nature is really beneficial for your mental health. And even if you aren't used to spending time in nature, you can just look out a window. You can, you don't have to, like, I had a student who was like, I'm allergic to everything, I never go outside, kind of thing. It's like, you can still enjoy nature without going outside. But just really talking to them about the benefits to their mental health really seems to hook my students, at least, regardless of their major, because there's so much struggle with that right now.
Also, I had it in a list on my one slide, but I didn't have time to point them all out. Environmental health issues like disease ecology, or certainly the ecology of pollutants and so forth, is related to physiological health as well, that I think can appeal to everyone.
All right, I think we are just about at time. So unless there's any last comments from anybody or questions, I think we will call it a day. All right, well, thank you to all our speakers and everybody who came. And we hope that you had a great time engaging with 4DE for non-majors.